I'm Tommy the Duke Morrison, a heavyweight with 24 knockouts, and I'm going to the top.
Let's get ready to rumble.
That's when he fought George Foreman.
Did he win that fight? No.
Yes, he did. He beat George Foreman.
Introducing first, fighting out of the blue corner, wearing the black trunks with stars and bars, weighing in at 226 pounds. This knockout artist has a professional record of 36 victories with 32 KOs against only one defeat. He comes here tonight from Kansas City. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the number 2 ranked heavyweight in the world, Tommy the Duke Morrison.
I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. However, if getting up here today and confronting this problem out in the open can get just one person out there to take a more responsible attitude towards sex, then I feel I would have scored my biggest knockout ever.
And then he told me the history of who diagnosed and how he was diagnosed with AIDS. And I told him that doesn't make sense.
And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, he told him he had a blood disease. The doctor to give the Duke a blood disease to keep him out of the ring.
He said is not used for detecting or diagnosing HIV infection. And I said, yeah, I found that out.
All right, I'm happy to announce the return of Trisha Morrison. Now, Trisha is the widow of Tommy Morrison, the boxer featured in Rocky V as the character Tommy Gunn, who had an incredible comeback period, defeated George Foreman, the boxer, was en route to possibly fight Mike Tyson for the world championship, only to have a test returned, supposedly, that stated that he had AIDS, and thus ending his entire career. Now, this is a return of Trisha, and we went over all this information in the previous show. Not all of it, as much as we could. Trisha's phone was dying at the time and was not able to hold data, so it was a little rushed at the end. And I wanted to take this opportunity to catch up on things that we may have missed, and obviously a lot has happened since. So, Trisha, how are you doing today?
Hi, Eric. I'm doing great. Thank you. I have a new phone as well, so hopefully this will go well.
I'm sure it will, and it's good to see you, and you've not been sitting still. When I left off with you last time, you were trying to get in front of the Supreme Court. I don't know if they had actually responded at that point, but it was really close. It was like literally within days of your submitting your case. So what happened?
Yeah, so what happened there is I did submit Tommy's case to the U.S. Supreme Court for the second time, right? And the reason for submitting it to the Supreme Court for the second time was based on new evidence, right? And the new evidence was some biological evidence belonging to Tommy that I wanted to have tested for DNA HIV testing. And the federal court in Nevada had turned that down. The Ninth Circuit in San Francisco had turned it down. So the next avenue was to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's where I filed it. And yes, when we left off on the other interview, we were still waiting to hear back from the U.S. Supreme Court.
You had it tied to a death penalty case that was going on at the same time in Oklahoma or somewhere. There was some other case, and I think you were using it as a precedent.
Right. Yeah, it was Reed versus Gertz in the U.S. Supreme Court. And I honestly don't know what happened to that case. I don't think that he was granted DNA testing for his murder case. So I carried on doing all the rest of my investigations after that. But the U.S. Supreme Court, you asked me what happened with that.
Mm-hmm.
They accepted the documents. It went into their conference meeting, which was before Roe versus Wade. And I'm going to read to you a little statement that I kind of typed out because I thought it was important when they turned me down. This is what I recorded. Understanding and grasping a discretionary denial of Tommy's case. As per the US Supreme Court today, 16,000 cases are filed every year in the US Supreme Court. Only 50%, that's 8,000 cases, actually get to the docketed stage. And Tommy's was one of them. And Tommy's was one of them before as well at the US Supreme Court. But only 1% of the cases are reheard, and that would be about 75 to 80. And the US Supreme Court person told me, he said, discretionary denial does not mean Tommy's case did not have merit, said the US Supreme Court today. The discretionary denial was not subject to or influenced by any of the 9 justices' discretion, judgment, or preference. It is not disclosed how many justices wanted to rehear Tommy's case, but it would have taken 4 justices, rule of 4, as it's called, out of the 9 to be a part of the 1% caseload. Perhaps there were only 3 justices. We will never know.
Okay, that makes sense. And Supreme Court, I think, is tricky too. I mean, very few cases get in front of them, and I think they only really hear cases that are about changing laws or changing policy, or so the case could be 100% legitimate, but they might not consider it part of their mission in order to uphold or push down a law. It's totally
Right.
legit case. So where does it go from here? I mean, is the civil case then effectively dead, or is there more to come?
Well, the civil case is closed. It was never dismissed by federal court. It was just closed, right, by the judge in Vegas. And he actually closed the case in 2016. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. For 7 more years, I kept fighting it. And over the course of 7 years, new evidence kept on coming up. So when I was finally closed by the US Supreme Court, I didn't pursue it any longer in federal court in Nevada, but I continued to try and get what I wanted as information. As you probably know, and when you interviewed me before, all the information I found out in the nearly 11-year lawsuit is in fact fantastic information. It was the only way to gather the information is to have these people put under oath and confess and admit to what they knew and what they didn't know. So I continued, Eric, to find out, for example, the disc that one of the pharmaceutical companies, which is Quest Diagnostics, they had retrieved all Tommy's medical information from University of Nebraska Medical Center. And they said to the judge, and that's the judge in Vegas, San Francisco, and the US Supreme Court, that everything on this disc was everything belonging to Tommy, right? And I had a hunch that no, they are not disclosing all the negative for AIDS diseases that Tommy had to prove that he did not have AIDS. They're not disclosing his antemortem from Boston, Massachusetts, which showed no virus. They're not disclosing Tommy's postmortem that was done at the University of Nebraska Medical Center that showed no HIV, no abnormalities, no viral particles, no retrovirus, which all means no HIV, no AIDS. And they said to all the judges and justices, no, everything is on here, and none of that was there. So I continued with the University of Nebraska Medical Center out of the lawsuit, and they sent me a USB stick, right, Eric?
Mm-hmm.
And on that USB stick was everything that was on the original disc that they had sent to Quest Diagnostics.
Mm.
And on there was Tommy's postmortem, was Tommy's antemortem, was Tommy's negative for AIDS diseases, and also was a result for the tissue that I found that existed still, biological evidence belonging to Tommy, and those results were in there, and those results were negative for Kaposi sarcoma, which is an AIDS-defining disease, and also no abnormalities in that tissue.
Okay, now one of the questions that has come up, and apparently I neglected to get it in the last interview, was what in fact actually did kill Tommy. And I believe it had something to do with gauze, but if you could break it down, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we missed that. There's just so much information to unpack in Tommy's case. It's more concise now. I have basically everything that's needed. But for the viewers that saw our first interview, we may have done it and it may just have just not recorded. But when Tommy was arrested in 2011, and he was arrested on what was now a bogus felony fugitive warrant of arrest. And it ended up being an $80 unpaid fine from a 2006 South Dakota case. And all that was needed was to pay the South Dakota Police Department $80. There was no need for a sealed warrant of arrest, no need for it to be a felony charge, nothing. And this is what I found out after the fact, right? But when Tommy came out of jail, he was put into jail for over 30 days. And in that jail, it was probably the worst time of his life during that period of time. He was in jail for 23 hours a day and let out for 1 hour. He was also chained at the wrist, chained at the ankles, and he was then extradited to a jail in Wichita, Kansas.
For $80?
And yeah. But this was under a sealed warrant. We didn't know what it was. There was no way of unsealing it until he got to the judge in Wichita. And the night before he went in front of the judge, and obviously the media were there that next day, he had been thrown into a cell with 5 gang members in Wichita. And they all annoyed each other. And of course, when they annoyed Tommy, he did throw a left hook at one of the gang members in the jail. And then Tommy was taken out of that cell, put into a disciplinary cell, and he slept on the floor. And the next day, he was pulled up in front of the judge to review what the charges were. When he came out of jail, when I finally bailed him out, he came out with an insect bite to the side of his chest, Eric. And this is something that the media have not mentioned. And I took him immediately to the doctor, and his name is Dr. Osio in Wichita. And in fact, I think we did put up this letter that confirmed that it was a spider bite that he came out with on our last interview. And we did show some of the shots of Tommy's chest, but we never actually showed what had happened to him after the surgery. Tommy eventually returned back to Tennessee, and he had to have surgery on his chest because it looked as though it was becoming more infected. So we went to a surgeon in Tennessee at Knoxville Hospital, and the surgery was scheduled for December 1. Surgeon said it's going to be a 1-hour surgery. And so we drove there on December 1. We parked in the 2-hour parking, and it was supposed to be an in and out surgery. Well, the surgery took about 8 hours. Jeez. And Tommy was never released for another 8 days. And when he was released, I drove home. He was just a totally different person. The next day, the home health lady came to visit us, and she had orders on her paperwork, which I do have, to change the bandage off his chest. So this is a real photo of Tommy's chest. And this is just a reenactment, obviously. And she was supposed to change the 4x4 on the outside of his chest. That was it. So Tommy was in the kitchen. He was sitting on a stool. And as she took off the 4x4 bandage, she was about ready to put the new one on. And I said, no, wait, there's something sticking out of his chest still. And it was kind of some threads. And she said, no, that's all I have to do. And I said, no, there's something in his chest. And so I was there. A friend of Tommy's was there as a witness, and we pointed and we said, no, there's something sticking in his chest. And so she looked and she finally noticed that there was a piece of thread stuck in his chest. She started to pull. Eric, and this is a reenactment, obviously, but this is the exact same size of the gauze, and it was surgical gauze that came out of Tommy's chest. And as you can see, it was tightly packed, but it carried on being pulled out by the nurse. And again, she had no idea it was in there. We had no idea it was in there. Tommy was just sitting on a stool in the kitchen as all this got unpacked from Tommy's chest. Now, you've never seen him cry in the ring. He never even cried when Ray Mercer did the most brutal knockout in history, but he was crying.
I would be crying.
This was all pulled out of his chest, and it carried on and on and on. There were blood clots in it. Obviously, it smelled really bad. And I always say I don't know how tall you are, but Tommy was 6'2", 6'3".
That's what I am.
This was 12 foot of surgical gauze.
Jesus.
And that was tightly packed in his chest. That
so
was the
sepsis.
Beginning. Yeah, that was the beginning of the downfall. The home health lady, she had to lay on the sofa. I had to take care of her. Tommy's friend had to take care of Tommy. And that night, Tommy went to the bedroom. His right leg gave way. It was almost like he had some kind of a stroke, right, Eric? And his right leg gave way. His head went straight through into the wall in the corridor of the bedroom, broke the sheetrock, which is plaster. It broke. His head went straight through there, and he landed on his neck, right? That was the beginning of the downfall.
Wow.
And it wasn't until 6 months later that we found out from a physician in Nebraska that when he landed on his neck, he actually paralyzed half his voice box. And that was the reason why, as he was trying to eat and drink during that previous time, he wasn't able to do it properly because it was going straight through into his lungs. He was getting aspiration pneumonia because his voice box wasn't closing and his esophagus wasn't working. So that was the beginning of Tommy's downfall. And people will say, well, why didn't you sue the surgeon that left the 12 foot of gauze in there? Well, I called the surgeon while this was happening, and I said, what did you do? You've just left gauze in my husband's chest. And he apologized on the phone, right? And so for the next few months, I then had to gather up all the information. And this is while I'm with Tommy in ICU and hospitals. And I filed a complaint with the Tennessee Medical Advisory Board. And as I tried to follow it up, they said they lost it, and I had to resubmit it. So when I resubmitted it, they then told me I was out of time.
Okay, it's that old standing or latches. But
so that's what happened there, and that was the beginning of Tommy's downfall, which the media just has not reported on. And it's not, not just a little piece of gauze, like people have like that. You
right.
saw the difference, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was 12 foot of gauze.
Yeah, I don't even know how it got in there. That's just craziness. But I wonder if they dropped a ball of gauze. That's the only thing that would make sense for it to be in there, like when they were wrapping somehow. I don't know. That's crazy.
Yeah, they packed it. They packed it into his chest. And it was a huge gaping hole. They took out major and minor pec muscle. He had had implants in there for whatever reason. That was well before my time. They had to take that out.
Okay.
And the only way that his wound would heal would be from the inside out, right? They never actually stitched it up on the outside. It would have to heal from the inside out. And that all began because of what the physician said was possibly a brown recluse spider bite. And what's really strange is that exactly the same thing has happened to another boxer in South Africa over the last couple of months.
Really?
And he sent me his gaping hole of what a brown recluse can do, exactly the same as Tommy's, right? But I honestly believe that if the surgeon had not left this gauze in there for over 8 days, and it caused septic shock, septicemia, that he would still be alive today because his actual surgery wound did heal. But the septic shock and septicemia was already in his system, and no antibiotics could get rid of that.
Wow, that is such a terrible thing. And then a terrible irony, too, because when he passed, he looked terribly gaunt, no weight, etc.,
Right.
which people immediately attached the AIDS label to because it fit
Right.
the cognitive dissonances or confirmation bias, if you will, because, he had HIV or tested for HIV. He got really, really skinny. Obviously, he died of AIDS.
Look at that picture of him after he got arrested. See that picture right next to your cursor? That's him on the right-hand side, HIV positive, all f***ed up after he got arrested.
God.
Yeah.
Did he ever get AIDS?
He looked like he was...
He died.
I think he died of AIDS. But that was him.
Oh, my God.
He was falling apart. His life was over. I mean, he would just...
44?
Yeah, he died real young.
It's kind of, I think, how it got reported, partially because of how he looked.
That's exactly how it got reported. But what the media misses is a huge chunk in between, that they didn't mention that he'd got thrown into jail for 30 days and had lost 25 pounds in jail. They don't mention the horrendous 12 foot of gauze left in there. They don't mention the septic shock, the septicemia, which was actually what was on Tommy's death certificate when he died.
Now, you keep saying the media missed, the media missed, the media missed. Now, I believe there was an ESPN 30 for 30 show done on Tommy, which was very, very strong on the narrative of HIV, AIDS. It even included talking to his mother, who I believe substantiated what they said.
And then in one moment's time, in one day, people run from you. How do you cope with that?
No, but I've heard that over time, more information has come out. Like one, there's an Angelique McQueen, whom you introduced me to, or I got connected with, and she had a boxer who also coincidentally died in 2013, and she told a story of Don King and misreporting of this test.
Yes, I was actually blown away. But Angelique McQueen came forward, and this was really after the case and after all the evidence that I found out. And she contacted me to let me know that one of her boxers that she was the advisor for, Omar Henry was his name, that he had visited with Don King to sign his contract, remembering that, of course, Tommy had his contract with Don King, and that during his meeting with Don King, he had mentioned that Don King supposedly had said that, don't worry about your medicals, I pay off doctors, right? So, whatever ailment you have, you'll be fine. I pay off the doctors. So, Don King does play a big part of it, and I believe. And of course, Don King had Mike Tyson, and now he has Tommy under contract. The fact that Tommy was supposed to fight Mike Tyson and now suddenly gets pulled out of that fight because he suddenly has HIV. This all happens under Don King contract. And so Omar Henry, who is no longer alive, he is dead. He apparently died of gallbladder cancer.
Rapidly.
Although, yeah, very rapidly. But what hasn't been mentioned is that he didn't have a gallbladder, right? It had already been taken out a few years before. So, that's another mystery there. But he had mentioned also that Duke, who was Tommy's nickname, was apparently the victim of results that weren't true, right?
Omar, are you taking steroids? And he said, it doesn't matter because Don pays off the doctors. And so it doesn't matter. And I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, he pays off the doctors. He's like, it's not like he's going to say, like what he did to, he said, Duke. He didn't say Tommy. It's not like what he did to Duke from Rocky 3, is what he said. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, he told him he had a blood disease. The doctor to give the Duke a blood disease to keep him out of the ring.
So, it's a possibility that those results were made positive, or that a physician had been paid off to make them positive. So, and this doesn't come from me. It doesn't come from Don King. It comes from somebody who had worked with a boxer who was told directly by Don King.
Now, just to know for everybody, from what I understand, your civil case has pretty much died, and the statute of limitations precludes anything from happening to Don King. So, like, if he came out tomorrow and said, "Yep, I paid that doctor off. I sure did. I sure did. I sure did," nothing would really happen because it would be well past the statute of limitations. Is that correct?
Well, actually, what's real interesting, I mean, I have the whole contract here, right, from Don King. There's a little bit of history that goes just behind the Don King scene. You will actually find out a lot more about an answer. How do I say it? In answer to what you've just said, in Tommy's documentary that's coming out called I Am Tommy Morrison. And Don King actually avoided me from 2013, 2014, after Tommy died, through to 2023, right, after our interview. But I finally met up with him. And you'll get your answer to what you just asked watching that documentary. It's a pretty big deal.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. She's talking about burying the lead there.
Yeah. But as far as the civil case being closed, it is closed. I filed the case under the estate of Tommy Morrison, right? But I've actually kept the estate of Tommy Morrison still open. And what's funny is that one of the messages or comments on your interview that you did with me last time was that if I can find that a federal crime had been committed, a cover-up, that supposedly that would get rid of the statute of limitations. But I was to check with Attorney Barnes, right? So if your buddy Attorney Barnes is listening to this case, maybe there's still something out there, right?
I'm sure I can ask Barnes about
it. Yeah.
Okay, well, fascinating. Okay, so other developments I believe his mother's story may be evolving over time, from what I understand. And his trainer, I believe, I don't know if it's his trainer or manager, but there's another gentleman involved who I think might have done a cease and desist. I believe he reached out to me as well at one point. So what is happening first with his mother? Is she still holding steady, or is she evolving?
So I don't really have much contact with his mother. During the 10 years of the lawsuit, I got a lot of character assassination hits against me, right? And, let me read you out some of these, right? Um, I was called a gold digger, and, the actual lawsuit was filed under the estate, which would mean that whoever is part of the estate would have profited had we won. But I really believe that we did win because we found out confirmation that actually nobody had diagnosed Tommy with HIV in Vegas. So, as far as gold digging goes, the big pot of gold was actually that information there for me. Then I was accused by the family for wanting citizenship, right? And that's why I met Tommy. Well, that isn't correct. I'm actually a legal resident alien, got my green card, can get my citizenship at any time. So that is just a not a nice thing to say. Then I was accused of selling Tommy's ashes, and that also is a lie. When Tommy died, I actually split his ashes between his mother and myself. She chose to bury them. I chose to fulfill one of Tommy's wishes, which was actually to make necklaces, boxing glove necklaces with Tommy's ashes in them, which I wear today. And a lot of really great people wear his ashes, which is exactly what Tommy wanted. And it all goes back to the movie Rocky Five, when you see boxing glove necklaces is handed out there. Um, and that I was ugly, right? And that I was in denial. I also got death threats. I was accused of using other people's blood to get all these results, which is not true. So, unfortunately, and in fact, I lost one of my jobs because of the way I was portrayed on ESPN 30 for 30. I don't think I mentioned this to you last in our interview. I worked for the Marriott hotels, and the owner of that hotel is called Phil Ruffin, and Ruffin owned the Mirage Hotel in Vegas and a very close friend of Don King's. So there's a little bit of a loop there. And as soon as the ESPN 30 for 30 came out, I was let go from the Marriott Hotel. So yeah, real interesting. So, but as far as his mother goes, the only thing I ever say to her is I thank her for giving birth to Tommy Morrison, and I keep it at that. But yes, I did get a cease and desist. You're absolutely right. And the cease and desist came to me in February of 2023. So it wasn't that long ago. And I have a whole little file on the cease and desist. So if a 10-year lawsuit isn't enough, then it's this. So the cease and desist was sent through to me, and it was sent through to me on like two pieces of paper, and it did not have the letterhead, a proper letterhead of the attorney. So I had to, in the end, find out where this attorney was, what city, what state, fax number, email, who it was. And so I had to do a lot of research there. But the cease and desist came from Tony Holden, who happens to be the one that told Tommy he had HIV in Vegas. And he is not the trainer, he's not the promoter, he was not the advisor. He had actually got his own agreement signed with Don King for that fight. So, but he was the one that told Tommy he had HIV. So the cease and desist came to me basically to stop me doing any interviews with you, any interviews with anybody, even though I am Tommy's widow And I'm allowed to have all this paperwork. I'm allowed to have the 1996 results. I'm allowed to have the deposition testimony. In fact, all this is public knowledge. So whatever I repeat on my interviews comes directly either from court records, from the defendants, from people themselves, like Tony Holden in his depositions, and from medical records that come from facilities. So I'm not making any of this up. I'm basically the messenger.
Did you know, I did want to point this out. Now, I know you're extremely well studied, taking your case all the way to the Supreme Court. I may be telling you something you already know. But if, let's say, you did have a cease and desist from Tony Holden, I'm imagining that he is threatening to sue you for defamation or the like if you were to continue talking. I just wanted to point out that if he did by chance sue you, that he would have to turn over all of his phone records, all of his emails, all of his communications that might be deemed as relevant to your case, especially if you are stating that he was repeating bad information and could have been under influence. So all of his communications with Don King, all of his communications with whomever else. And I would never, ever, ever, ever recommend somebody to wish to be sued, but there is a distinct possibility that if you were sued, there could be something in discovery that could be fascinating for the world.
Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I'm not schooled in law, but it's just common sense, Eric. So I responded finally when I got to find out the attorney and his location, and he's based in Oklahoma. I responded exactly how you just said, right? I sent an email on February 17th, 2023 at 2:34 p.m. requesting everything that you had just mentioned that would come out in discovery, right? Okay, so Tony Holden, who told you that Tommy had HIV? Can you show me the results, Tony? And it's all these pages here, right? And it's directed actually at the attorney that sent me the cease and desist. And it's completely detailed, and I'm happy to send it out to anybody. If anybody wants to email me, Tommy and Trisha Morrison at yahoo.com, I will forward to you exactly what I asked in return. And in fact, how I started, Eric, I'm very polite. I go, I am in receipt as of February 9, 2023, of your cease and desist letter dated February 1, 2023, on behalf of your client, Mr. Tony Holden et al., because there were some other people that were attached to it, right? As the wife and widow of Tommy Morrison and the executrix of the estate of Tommy Morrison, I am open to a constructive dialogue with you, your firm, and Mr. Tony Holden et al. And I continue, yes, we must immediately curtail and abate to any alleged slander, libel, and dissemination of false and misguided information. That works both ways, Eric, right? When you think of the defamation and slander that's been put out there on me. As your firm did not provide any examples, please submit as quickly as you can everything Mr. Tony Holden et al. Believes falls into the above categories, and we will happily, publicly, openly, and immediately review. Upon review, we can all efficiently decide whether the link or segment needs to be deleted, amended, or edited, right? So I send that out and I ask for all the information and where I'm wrong and who's providing incorrect information, because a lot of it comes from the Nevada Commission itself under oath. So if they have committed perjury under oath, I would really like to know.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing that you immediately got a reply.
Yeah, you're guessing wrong. I never, ever got a reply. And then I had an attorney in Florida respond also in my defense, just to put a lid on it, right? And the attorney goes, Luke, right, I am in possession of your letter titled Cease and Desist, addressed to Patricia Harding, whose true name is Morrison, because they were telling me to cease and desist from using the name of Morrison, even though I married him, right? Please be advised that I represent Mrs. Morrison, the widow of Tommy Morrison. You are the one who is now required to cease and desist from having any further direct communications with Mrs. Morrison. Any and all future communications must be through me. I trust that this is to your satisfaction. Yours, Peter Tickton. And that is the attorney in Florida. And
Let me guess.
he never.
Crickets?
Crickets. But in addition, while I'm doing my research, right, on the attorney that's representing Tony Holden et al., I find out that the very same attorney law firm is representing Tony Holden in a lawsuit, right? And obviously I printed out the lawsuit, and it's in the District Court of Potawatomi Court, state of Oklahoma, where the Peoria tribe of Indians of Oklahoma are suing Tony Holden for $2.1 million embezzlement of where he was running the tribe's casino in Oklahoma called the Buffalo Run. And this is a case that nobody has mentioned. It's not out in the media. And I was like blown away thinking, wow, he's in a $2.1 million embezzlement lawsuit and he's after me for this. And just to let you know, it's still ongoing. It's in the appellate court for the tribe. So, you are innocent until proven guilty. And I strongly believe in that, right? So I don't know what the results are, whether the tribe will win or whether Tony Holden will win. But
it looks like he got
yeah.
a dismissal in 2023, and
Right.
it's being appealed. So
Correct.
Seems like he's
Yes.
prevailing at the moment, if
Right.
I'm being fair to him.
Yeah. And let's be fair. Let us be fair on that. So yeah, it's in the Court of Appeals down there with the tribe. So, but coming back to your question, yeah, if he wanted to continue this cease and desist, yes, I'm quite happy to let it go further, because then I can get all the answers to everything in my email that I had sent him, and let's do it in court, right? I have no problem doing that, but I've not heard anything back.
Well, now, because I did hear from him, there's a good possibility he'll watch this interview. So I just wanted to put the question out there publicly. Would you be willing to come on and have a discussion with him in an interview format, which I can do as a live stream, and I would deliberately do it as a live stream because both of you would know that it's live, it's not being pre-recorded, I can't edit it down because people would recognize that information got cut out in either way. So it kind of protects all parties.
Right.
Would you be willing to do that if he was to reach out and say, yes, I would love to discuss what happened?
Yeah, but I'm all for it. Yes.
Okay. And I'm just saying, especially with statute of limitations and things like that, then a lot of this, from what I am interpreting, is you just want to give the guy his name back. In the end, you just are trying to establish Tommy Morrison was just a boxer and he got a bum deal.
Yeah, he did. And, I have, as everybody calls it now, the receipts. These are all the receipts. These are all the documents that come directly from the court, from physicians, from scientists, from lab techs, from the commission themselves. There was never a diagnosis made of HIV in 1996 in February to be able to kick Tommy Morrison out of boxing.
Well, fantastic. And you'll be sharing a lot of these with me. I'll be trying to put them up here. I may actually put a copy up in a folder, if it's okay with you, that people can go click and peruse on their own if they want to fight and argue, because I believe you want this to be spread far and wide so people can see it, share, and know what's going on.
Yes, correct. And it's also available in the court of law, which is the beauty of having gone through an 11-year lawsuit, is that everything is in the court of law, docket numbers, line numbers, page numbers, everything. Yeah.
Okay, now there's a documentary underway right now, being filmed. I believe my friend Gavin Stone, who is on here quite a bit, is even going to be part of it. When do you foresee that documentary actually being released?
Yes, it's Tommy's official documentary, and it's called I Am Tommy Morrison. And it's the way Tommy lived his life, lived and breathed it. And the people that have been chosen to be in it actually were either part of his life or were touched by his life. And you have to remember that while Tommy was alive, he knew exactly how his story wanted it to go, right? He wrote about his own life. It was very therapeutic for him. He wrote some paperback books, one called My Boxing Career, where he actually sits down and he relives each fight that he had. And Eric, this is without even looking at the fights on YouTube or on his computer or anything. He's sitting there and he is telling me about the fights, and I'm typing it up for him. And we published that book, right? Absolutely amazing that he remembered every single fight. And it's from his perspective, not from the media's, not from the mothers, the fathers, or whatever. It's from Tommy's point of view. And then he writes about my darkest years, right? Those are the years where he touches on his life, drugs. And I've started to include in some of my interviews about his drug use, right? Because of the way he's touched people's lives, that he actually was able to finally do drug rehab. And I even show people his negative for cocaine, negative for meth. And I'll give you a copy of this too to put up in your
Please.
little folder, right? And so I'm able now to tell the next generations, yes, he went through a hard time. He had to fill a void in his life, but he also was able to overcome that and to do drug rehab. I actually partnered with WBO, the World Boxing Organization, which was one of the titles that Tommy had when he won one of his belts, and they brought out little medallions for me, kids drug free, and we were able to do a nice amateur boxing tournament and give every child that participated one of these, along with Tommy's negative results for drugs, to show that. But it was a big part of his darkest years. You get kicked out, you have to fill it with a void, and he filled it with drugs, but he overcame it. And then there was another book that he wanted to have published when he got kicked out of boxing. And this was before my time. And it's a lot about his childhood, right? Which obviously was not mentioned in ESPN 30 for 30. Was ESPN 30 for 30 a true story? Is that what they're saying? Or is Tommy Morrison's actual story based on his books and what he lived and breathed? Is that the true story, right? But anyway, coming back to the documentary, it's his official documentary. I Am Tommy Morrison is due to come out in 2025. Filming is still in process. Have some absolutely amazing people, and the people that are not in it will stand out as perhaps not being part of Tommy's life.
Oof, well, that's brutal. Okay, I always like to end every interview by asking a final question. And this question is essentially, what question did I neglect to ask you? Or, if you will, is there a question that you've done all these interviews, you've done this for all these years, that you've been waiting? Would somebody ask me this damn question? Because I really want to get that out.
I think you have been extremely thorough. I watch a lot of your interviews, and you always seem to ask the right questions. The thing is with Tommy's case is that so much more information keeps coming up, right? So it's hard for you to ask a question, but I try and include it in whatever I say in the interview. Perhaps I would like to add something is, sometimes we get remarks and comments on our interviews, and they want to know, well, how did Tommy die? Well, look at the whole entire interview, because normally we cover everything in the whole interview, and people just want to comment out there. She's in denial. What happened to him? What did he really die of? Everything is in the interview. Just sit and listen to it. So I had somebody who asked me a question. So I asked him a question back. And he was somebody that was also well versed in law and science. And he asked me several questions. And I'm going to give all these several questions for you, right? He was a detective, okay? And I've met some really very interesting people on all the podcasts I've done, and they've been from all walks of life, Eric. I've done a podcast with the youngest podcaster on YouTube, right? I've done a podcast with the smallest Irish podcaster over in Ireland, with you, who has a lot of viewers. David Rodriguez, different people, because Tommy touched everybody's life, right? Well, here he touches a detective, and this detective has questions for me, right? And he says that he's a detective that's investigated over 200 deaths and listened to my videos at the beginning and called me incoherent, right?
Okay.
So I had to look up the word incoherent just really to see what he meant. And I thought, and I always try and answer every question, right? So here are the questions that he asked, right? And some of these questions you have not asked, but so I'm going to mention it to you. Did the death certificate list complications from AIDS? I go, no. You don't have to list that there are complications from AIDS. If the hospital was not happy with the death certificate or the post-mortem, they would have called in for another report, did they? And I went, no, they were happy with the post-mortem and they didn't. They didn't redo it. Did I commission my own post-mortem from an outside provider weeks after his death? And I go, no, it was performed in-house. So Tommy died at 11:50 p.m. They asked if I wanted an autopsy post-mortem. I said yes, because people are going to say he got diagnosed with HIV in 1996 in February in Nevada, and so that's why he's dead, because he's got AIDS. Well, now over 11 years span, he never got diagnosed with HIV in Vegas, and he never died of AIDS.
So just to drive that point home, what you're saying then is that you did not hire your own hired gun person like many people would in a lawsuit. You didn't hire anybody outside. It was just whatever was available to the public, like any other person in the public, is what you had. And that's who gave you the results stating he did not have HIV, he did not have AIDS. Was just a normal course of doing business.
And slowly but surely, I got to know him. And then he told me the history of who diagnosed and how he was diagnosed with AIDS. And I told him that doesn't make sense. You don't look like you have sense. I mean, by then, in that time, 94, I think it was, we used to have, I have seen several patients with AIDS, and he didn't look at all like. And we decided to have him tested. And I tested him in the lab that we send the things from here. At that time, from here, we send it to a lab outside town. And the report was negative. Said there's no AIDS. Say, well, okay. Then we don't have to worry about any extra measure. And I treat him never Like a patient with AIDS.
Normal course of doing business, and also the record will show that there is a proper chain of custody where blood is drawn, a test requisition is written up and is sent to the lab on site and is analyzed, and it takes 2 weeks. Blood is photo imaged, a report is authored, it's signed as per the code of federal regulations. Everything is done legitimately under the law, right, of doing a post-mortem.
Okay.
So then he goes, was the body, and it really harsh questions, but I have to keep it business answers.
Mhm.
Was the body frozen at the time samples were taken? And I said, no. Tommy died at 11:50 p.m. They immediately drew the fluids that they needed for the post-mortem. He said the virus does not die at the time the person dies, so they would have seen it in the post-mortem. And I thanked him for that. I said, thank you. Yeah, obviously if they drew it, they knew that they were going to be able to see it. But I'll take that. He wanted to know how long Tommy was in hospital for. Well, it was a total of 21 months.
Wow.
In and out of hospital, in and out of ICU, in and out of wound care. Because remember, over the 21 months, they were dealing with an open wound.
Mhm.
So we're not just talking about, Tommy Morrison being in hospital. We're talking about wound care being performed, right? He did not know that wound care was a huge part of his daily treatment. It was. Wound care was done twice a day, literally cleaning the wound, rewrapping it, draining it. That was a huge part of his treatment. What was his diagnosis at death on his post-mortem? Well, it was cardiac arrest, septic shock, septicemia, multi-organ failure. He had been put in a coma 2 days before he died, and he never got out of the coma. And then he asked, well, what about all the testing? The viral load testing, which is the PCR testing, he said is not used for detecting or diagnosing HIV infection. And I said, yeah, I found that out. I said, in the course of this lawsuit, I found out that the viral load test, which is what he was given all those years, was not FDA approved for detecting and diagnosing HIV infection. And that's the PCR test that was invented by Kerry Mullis, who was doing LSD as he drove up Pacific Coast Highway, by the way. Then he said, the available science at the time, he said, there were a lot of LDTs, which is laboratory developed tests that were not FDA approved and still not approved. And in 1996, the viral load test was not FDA approved. And when it was in 2001, it was not approved for the detection of HIV infection. So this is coming from, the investigator who's been dealing with 200 deaths. So going back to ESPN 30 for 30, where you've got that doctor in the white coat, right? And he is saying to Tommy, about HIV infection. Well, the only test that he used was this viral load test, right? Which was not FDA approved for the detection or diagnosis of HIV infection. And then he goes, ashes can be tested for certain things. So I have ashes in these boxing glove lockets, but I still also have Tommy's ashes. So these ashes actually can now be tested, okay, for toxicology, for all kinds of stuff in the ashes. It's expensive. It's over $2,000. I've got quotes actually from a company in Denver. So if anybody wants to ask me, oh, well, he was on medication because, for HIV, AIDS, and that's why they didn't find the virus. Well, okay, let's go to court. Let's have the ashes tested now. And you'll find either he was on medication or not. Well, the toxicology reports show he was not on HIV medication. So, but he made a point of saying the ashes, right? And then he said, who has contradictory views? Okay, so there's always the view of, like me, there's the view of the physicians, there's the view of the media, right? Who has contradictory views? He said, and he's been following me, obviously, for 10, 11 years, the mother, the promoter, and, he said, are they licensed to practice medicine? And I went, no. He said, but they're the ones with the contradictory views in ESPN 30 for 30. And I go, yeah. And he said, well, why didn't they mention the post-mortem? And I said, I know. I don't know why. And then he goes on to say, do these people, meaning, I guess, the people in ESPN, do these people have scientific evidence and images of any virus in Tommy? And I said, no. They've never presented any scientific evidence or images of a virus in Tommy. Whereas in the lawsuit, I have scientific evidence in the form of Tommy's blood being a photo image at a higher magnification than any CDC magnification in the journals and scientific journals that show Tommy's blood was clear, right? And then he goes, lawsuit outcome. Statute of limitations barred any claims, and defendants confessed to not having diagnosed nor owned a diagnosis of HIV in Tommy. And I went, yeah, that's how it ended. And then he said, did they do additional testing between 1996 and 2012 for false positives? And I said, no, they didn't. And that's backed up by all the testimony in the depositions that they took, right? They did not do any additional testing to rule out false positive. And he said, was any additional testing done between 2012 and 2013? And I said, yes. He was tested for all the AIDS-defining diseases that you would have if you had HIV that ended up in AIDS. And then he asked a final question. He said, what science has come out since his death? Well, I responded that the Western blot test, the confirmation test that was used supposedly in Nevada and throughout Tommy's testing, had actually been dropped by the CDC in 2014, right? Just a few days before I filed the case, they dropped that Western blot confirmation testing because it was unreliable. The very test that accused Tommy of having HIV was dropped. And then I responded, yes. And Coombs positive was a test that Tommy was given. And if you test positive on Coombs positive test, which is an autoimmune disease, it's hemolytic anemia, you will test false positive on an HIV test, no matter how many times you take it. Because if you're hemolytic anemic, every time you take a test for that HIV, it will show a false positive until you finally get rid of being hemolytic anemia. And hemolytic anemia was one of the things found in his postmortem as well. So it was really interesting. So you have not asked me one of those questions, right?
You're right, I haven't. But I'm glad that I asked that. So now you've got a litany of questions for the
Yeah.
keyboard warriors in the comments, which they will come out, and we understand that comments will be positive, some will be negative, but folks, please try to look at all the evidence and decide for yourselves. Don't go 100% by what we're saying. Go ahead and watch 30 for 30. Go ahead and watch everything and then come to your own decision. And I look forward to getting with you again, possibly with Tony Holden, but if not, when the documentary comes out.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And I really want to thank you, Eric. Over the 11, 12 years now, people are wanting to interview me now. They don't think that I'm the stupid, wicked widow anymore. And they are actually starting to listen to the evidence out there. And that's all I want. That's all Tommy wanted. He wanted to exonerate himself, and he didn't want to let people down. And it was just a very, very horrible situation. And he didn't want this to happen to anybody else either. So he thoroughly loved his fans. His fans were his family. And I enjoy talking to them. And things are going very well for Tommy. He's actually winning right now.
That's good news. Thank you so much.
Yeah.